Today we have with us Metью Sprінґфордom. Welcome, Metью. It's wonderful to have you here. And as some of you might know, I'm from the PinchukArtCentre. My name is Björn Geldov. And we are making this program together with the British Council, who has been very generous in not only supporting but developing the concept together with us about what this open study program might be, and inviting all the speakers here. And together with them, we are very happy to give an opportunity to you to see from a different angle this wonderful exhibition we have of Anish Kapoor. So I would like to take the opportunity first, Metью, to thank you for coming and also for this wonderful movie or wonderful film. We have had the chance to see it already. Today we will see again some experts of it. And also, Martin, I would like to thank you and the British Council, as this has been a wonderful collaboration, and I think it's very important for us, the PinchukArtCentre, to show or to have this connection with you and to have the opportunity to bring these very important speakers here to Ukraine and to give access to a young public, as I'm very happy to see again so many young faces here in Ukraine. So I'll give the word to you.
Okay. Thank you, Bjorn, and it's a great pleasure for the British Council to be working with you in the PinchukArtCentre on this series, and I hope we'll do many more. First of all, to say that the documentary that Metью will show clips of this afternoon, you can see in its entirety at 8 o'clock this evening in the PinchukArtCentre, and again on the 30th, which is Sunday, not tomorrow, but the following Sunday, when it will be shown here at Taras Shevchenko University. Could I also thank Taras Shevchenko University for hosting the series of talks. And I would just like quickly to say a couple of words about Metью. Metью has been making documentaries for the BBC for around 15 years now, so has quite a substantial track record. And this one, The Year of Anish Kapoor, which we showed when we did when the British Council did a retrospective of Anish Kapoor's work in Delhi and Mumbai a couple of years back. It's a very interesting documentary, and I thoroughly recommend that you see it in its entirety. Metью works with someone called Alan Yentob, who is Director of Creativity at the BBC, and who you will see, or at least hear, in the narrative of the film. And he currently works on a BBC TV art series called Imagine, and alongside the Anish Kapoor one, he has done a documentary of Ai Weiwei, the Chinese artist, called Without Fear or Favor, and he's currently working on two new ones, one on Jeff Koons and one on Lang Lang, the pianist. So at this point, I'd like to pass over to Metью. Thank you.
Olga, could we get the lights on? Hello and welcome to this talk about the documentary The Year of Anish Kapoor. Thank you to the British Council and the PinchukArtCentre for inviting me to talk today, and to the university for hosting this event. My talk is going to be very much about the kind of making of the film and the sort of issues that were thrown up in the process of the year I spent with Anish Kapoor, more than sort of analysing the work, but obviously a lot of those issues came up when I was making the film. As Martin said, I'm the producer and director of the film, and my main role at the BBC is to make arts documentaries. Imagine is the flagship arts documentary strand, which is on BBC One, and we make about 12 films a year, and each film is very different. So this film, about Anish Kapoor was made in 2009 when he was preparing for a major exhibition at the Royal Academy in London. As you'll see in some of these clips, and some of you may have seen the film, some of the artwork in the documentary is also showing at the exhibition at the PinchukArtCentre. And I'm going to talk about the documentary for about 40 minutes and show some clips. And afterwards, I'd be very happy to take some questions. So please have a think about that while you're looking at the film. If anything occurs to you, I'd be very happy to answer any questions you have. So when I began this project, I had two questions in my mind. And one of them was, can you really capture a process that an artist goes through in creating work? Is it possible to give some real insight into the work and present a really authentic view of an artist as they are going through the process of creating their art? And secondly, can you really do justice to these quite complex three-dimensional artworks, which depend so much on being in their presence, of time spent with them in space? Can you ultimately convey a real sense of that materiality and presence of the work on film? So I spent a lot of time thinking about these two questions. In a way, they were a conceptual problem and a technical problem for me. How to reflect the genuine sense of an artist at work, and how to film the work in a way that would communicate its power. Well, it turned out to be, for me, quite a thrilling adventure this year, to work with an artist like Kapoor, such an extraordinary artist in many ways, and to have access to his studio and to his creative process. Anish Kapoor himself was very open and allowed me to see a lot of what was going on in his studio. But I also wanted to reveal something about him as well, as a person, and as a personality. And in my experience, artists can be quite private about their personal life because it's easy to conflate the biography of an artist with an interpretation of their work. And some artists' work is very biographical in nature, and of course Kapoor's is not in any explicit way, I would argue. So as a filmmaker, I had to find a balance, which is quite difficult to do, of how to reveal something about the artist, about his life, without over-influencing the interpretation of the work. And Anish Kapoor, like many artists, has an acute sense about this issue and would, I'm sure, resist any attempt to see his work as exotic or of Indian origin, for example. So as a filmmaker, the success of making a film is very much about gaining the trust of your subject, of making sure that these issues are addressed and balanced in a way with the need to tell the story and the need to make it interesting and entertaining for the viewer. I'll come back to this subject later in this talk, but it's something to bear in mind when you're looking at these clips. And the first clip I want to show you is from the opening of the film. Anish Kapoor's work is very popular with the public. He has a huge sense of fun and engagement, but it's also very serious work. And I wanted to try and explore this paradox, because sometimes, as Norman Rosenthal said on Thursday, the apparent decorative nature of some of the more the mirrored works, the more sort of striking mirrored pieces, can be criticized as being decorative. And I felt that I wanted to address this issue. And so I began the film with an experiment. I asked the presenter who's called Alan Yentob, and he's the creative director of the BBC. And he presents these programs. I asked him to walk up a hill to where Anish had placed an artwork. And I didn't tell him anything about it. I just wanted him to discover it for himself and to articulate his experience. Because I felt that in many ways that's how we experience Anish Kapoor's artwork for the first time. And I wanted to create that sense of discovery. The work is called Sea Curve, and it was placed on the top of a hill on the South Downs in Brighton, which is a town on the coast in the south of England. And the slightly misty day sort of added to the enigmatic quality of the work. So if you'd like to show the first clip, that would be great. Would you mind just turning the light on?
May 2009. On top of the South Downs near Brighton, a mysterious object merges with the landscape.
C curve, as in the letter C. This is quite disorientating in a rather interesting way.
This strange mirrored object seems to have reconfigured space here. Is this a new form of landscape painting?
Now I have the real landscape on my right and the image on my left. So I'm moving in and out of the landscape, and I can see this curve now. I don't know if it's in my head. I think I've invaded their territory. So what's the problem?
Shown as part of the Brighton Festival in May 2009, Sea Curve draws huge crowds, despite its remote location.
It's really, really beautiful, and that's the first thing that kind of strikes you.
The sheer expanse of it, it's really quite overwhelming.
I like the way on one side it's the right way up, and on the other side it's back upside down in 3D, like a spoon.
I think it's quite nice to think that when everyone's gone home at night, it's sort of sitting on the hilltop doing its thing still for anyone or any sheep that cares to walk past.
It seems almost quite mysterious. It's very simple. When you get closer and closer, you realise it's actually much more complex.
It's a shared experience, and I think that's a pretty good thing.
So, another issue with Anish Kapoor's work that I thought about a lot was how to deal with the different types of work that he does in a documentary film. There are pigment works, for example, with which he originally made his name, and he worked on those for about 10 years before starting a new series of works, which were voids. And there are many other areas he works in. And it seemed to me that in many ways, these different types of work are quite interconnected, but they also have their own distinct qualities. And I wanted to explore these connections, as well as their characteristics, in some detail. And I saw a work that he'd made, a contemporary piece, called the Dismemberment of Jeanne d'Arc, the Dismemberment of Joan of Arc. And it seemed to me reminiscent of some of his early pieces, but at its heart had a huge void. And since voids are such an important aspect of Kapoor's work, and fascinating in so many ways, I wanted to explore the connections and try and find a path for the viewer. So in the next sequence I'm going to show you, Kapoor himself also throws some other thoughts into the mix about this work, around the sense of event that he creates around these site-specific pieces, the sense that you need to make a journey. He refers to a pilgrimage to the site of his work, as indeed was the case with the work that you just saw, Sea Curve on the Downs. And the other subject here that is also so important to Kapoor's work is colour, and how he deals with colour, and what colour means. In this case, the colour red. What does it signify? How does it make you feel? What does it refer to? Is it internal spaces, the openings of the body, the interior space of the body? So there seem to be a lot of themes and interconnected ideas in this work, which I felt would allow me to both explore the journey he made, in a way, as an artist, from pigment to voids. So you'll see, the next piece I'll show you is starting with this piece called Dismemberment of Jeanne d'Arc. Did I have the next one?
I met Kapoor in Brighton, where I was reminded of some of his early pigment works. The same dark colours and familiar shapes, but here on a much larger scale.
You've called it the dismemberment of Jeanne d'Arc.
One is literally walking in her, amongst her, through her body. Now, I think the implication that the viewer is involved is something that's fundamental to sculpture.
And also the way that one body or one person responds to another.
Precisely. I mean, it's about those memories that are in there or in your stomach as much as the ones that are in your head. It's as if this body is laid out in a almost religious way, something to do with the way that one might go to Santiago de Compostela, you know, a kind of pilgrim. Yeah. The idea of a journey to an object, the journey to a place, a site. I think that's what at least that's the kind of sculpture I'm interested in.
The colour red is a sort of a favoured part of your palette, isn't it? Why red?
Red makes a kind of black. Makes a kind of black that blue doesn't. It's a black that you see when you close your eyes. It's something you know intimately, and it's that sort of knowing that I feel is the real subject of the work.
Darkness sometimes?
Totally. Darkness all the time.
His works seem to have a void, and then you're looking out into this space without limit and without boundary, and you don't know where you exist in relation to that. But it never feels like it's empty space. It always feels kind of weighted and like there's some life. You're struck, I think, with Anish's work is how it engages you in a very generous way. A lot of the realization of the work is happening through your response to it.
One is always on the brink of being both inside the work and outside the work. You're literally placed in relation to the void on an edge between what you know and what you don't know. but you are also on edge in the more emotional, affective way. He engages not only the eye, he engages the nerves, he engages the emotions.
Thanks. One of the problems I mentioned in the beginning was how to film the work, how to convey a sense of its presence in space, its form, its texture, how it relates to its environment. These things seem so important when you're looking at the work. And I explored two ideas throughout this film, several times. One was to use people, completely at random, who were looking at the work and ask them to describe what they were seeing, what they thought about the work and how it made them feel. And it produced some surprising results. And somehow, for me, it really brings the work to life, because central to this work is people's experience of it. And critics and gallerists and art specialists have their place in this film. But to hear from ordinary people felt very genuine and gave the work a kind of warmth and engagement. And the second thing I tried to do, for those of you who are interested in filmmaking, just from a technical point of view, was to try and have as much movement in the filming of the work as possible. To give a sense of shape and scale and texture. And where possible, I've always used people in the foreground or background to give that sense of human scale. Because obviously scale is something, and I'll come to this in a minute, scale is something that's absolutely central to Anish Kapoor's work, and some of the early work is very small, in fact, and then you see some of the larger work he's done later on is enormous. And it really has an impact on the way the artwork, on how you experience it. So in the next clip, you'll see a work called Sky Mirror. And Anish Kapoor has done a number of these sky mirrors. This one was placed, again, in Brighton, which is a town on the south coast of England. And people would walk through a small park where it was placed and come across this rather surprising and intriguing object. So I spent a day there filming, and this is the result.
I sort of get the glory bit with Anish, because he's basically just really keen on the final finish. He's not so interested in the process before that. He's sometimes really difficult to work with. So you've got to get into this state with him where he's happy with what he's looking at. So it's just a case of reading his mind, and that's not always very easy to do.
At the moment it's matte.
Yeah.
Will be, I think, glossy. The paint, in fact, we've just sort of sanded it down, and it's about to be polished.
Of course, like with any sculpture, I suppose, where you place yourself in relation to the body in relation to sculpture alters things, but there are all kinds of things that change as you walk around this object, aren't there? You can experience it in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
As I turn this corner, I have a completely other experience.
Well, the first thing is you realize it's a much longer object than you thought it was.
Yes.
So, it's become bigger.
That journey took rather longer than I expected.
Yeah. But also, it's little things.
A technical problem. It's the wrong clip.
I met Kapoor in Brighton, where I was reminded of some of his early pigment works.
No, this is... Okay.
The same dark colours.
We'll come back to
familiar
that.
shapes.
I'll talk about this clip that you just showed then, and then we can show it. Okay? Sorry about that. Hopefully we'll find that clip. But let me talk about the one that was just showing, and first of all, so that you know actually what you're looking at there. This was, for me, quite an interesting moment in the filming, because I talked earlier about the process. How do you film an artist at work? And how does an artist make decisions that are going to affect the outcome of the work? And in this situation, while I was filming, Anish Kapoor phoned me to say that he was going to Holland the next day, and would I like to come? And I'd never really, I didn't know what he was actually going to do particularly, but he seemed very keen that I would go. So I hired a camera and got on a plane, not really knowing what to expect. Now, I'm not a cameraman, so I didn't really follow what was happening during the course of the day. I was quite concentrated on the technical aspects of filming. But when I look back at the rushes later on, I realized that what we were looking at was Anish going through a process of making a decision in front of us about his work. And I found that very interesting. And all the time, the workers who had made this work were standing by, watching him. And the whole scene seemed to be foregrounded by this massive piece of work, which is called Hive. And it was central to the exhibition at the Royal Academy. Now, in the end, the decision that Anish made was that he would allow it to rust. And if you have a chance to watch the film, which, as Martin said, will be showing at the PinchukArtCentre tonight at 8 o'clock, and I think on a couple of other occasions. But it was a big decision because the effect of leaving it black had a very different effect. And I'm showing you the sequences just prior to that in the film because I think it plants two thoughts in your mind as a viewer. One is that the surface, the skin of an object for Kapoor is very, very important and something that he spends a huge amount of time thinking about, clearly. And secondly, that the idea that an object can transform our sense of space and light, and that partly is to do with its surface. So this is what happened in Holland.
I sort of get the glory bit with Anish because he's basically just really keen on the final finish. He's not so interested in the process before that. He's sometimes really difficult to work with. So you've got to get into this state with him where he's happy with what he's looking at. So it's just a case of reading his mind, and that's not always very easy to do.
You know, at the moment it's matte.
Yeah.
Will be, I think, glossy. The paint, in fact, we've just sort of sanded it down, and it's about to be polished.
Of course, like with any sculpture, I suppose, where you place yourself in relation to the body in relation to sculpture alters things, but there are all kinds of things that change as you walk around this object, aren't there? You can experience it in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
As I turn this corner, I have a completely other experience.
Well, the first thing is you realize it's a much longer object than you thought it was.
Yes.
So, you know, it's become bigger.
That journey took rather longer than I expected.
Yeah. But also, it's little things, but the light's different there than it is here.
And the sound's different.
The sound's different. So it's like the lens on the camera where light crosses. And I suggest that that's a kind of mystical moment where things are different. They're different there than they are here.
The work is not bound by the studio walls. In a shipyard in Holland, One of the largest pieces in the exhibition is being assembled. Made from cotton steel, Anish Kapoor is seeing it for the first time.
The first thing is, you know, does it work? Does it do what I set out to do? You know, I believe it does. These guys are great shipbuilders, and more important than anything else, they can hold these complex curves, hold to a particular geometry, and have it be accurate. I must say they've done a fantastic job. The issue I'm trying to deal with at the moment is how the object, or how the skin of it is. You know, are we going to keep it black, or am I going to rust it? It's a hard decision. You know, sculpture's, of course, supposedly all about material, but material is a subtle thing. It makes a huge difference. So I want to go and see what's going on there. That's a little bit of a problem for me, Allard.
In order to choose the right finish, he asks for some of the metal to be rusted so he can compare the two surfaces. It requires a chemical to accelerate the process.
Can we get some in the next 2 hours?
We'll try and make a call.
Okay. I mean, really, I'd like to do this whole section.
The whole section?
Uh-huh.
And we need a lot of it.
Yes.
And we need a lot of more.
There is a contradiction, because the material isn't made to go black. The material's made to rust.
That's right.
There's something about its sort of muteness. Black, that I quite like. Fucking hard decision.
Just checking something. Oh, okay. Good. So this is the clip I was going to show you before. Which is called Sky Mirror. So perhaps we should see that one now, since I've actually already introduced that clip. This is the piece that was filmed in the park. And I was talking about how I was using the public and the responses of people passing to try to sort of give the work some life.
It's like a piece of the sky, kind of, that you can look at. You'll see that the clouds move very slowly across, and it makes you think that you're moving, and the piece itself is actually moving and alive. It does really give you the sense that it's something else beyond what it actually is reflecting. And then a bird flies at a greater speed across it. And I found myself at first looking beyond the shape to see where the bird had gone. If you step up close to it, you have the sense you could be completely absorbed by it and just disappear into it and become part of it. It's actually, I mean, it's incredible.
The cost of it is £1.3 million as you.
1 to patrol 6. Patrol 6 receiving.
In the night, it has got very high risk because drunk people, they come around, try to touch it, try to cover it, try to do anything. That's why we stand in there all the time.
It changes from every direction. And not only from every direction, but with every movement of the sky, change of light. And I think that's what draws me very much to it. You could stand and look at it for hours and never see the same thing, and I think that's just amazing.
It just changes. You know, I mean, in that corner I was watching a little bit of the pavilion. I walked around here and saw the whole tree. It's absolutely lovely.
Right,
I think this is a really good place for it because it's a place that everyone passes through, and you've got sort of landscape and heritage and then something totally, totally modern, as if it's just flown in overnight. Yes. It's an extraterrestrial quality, I think.
As well as making art for galleries, Anish Kapoor also makes quite extraordinary public artworks. He recently made a spectacular work for the Olympics in London called Orbital, which some of you may have seen, a spiraling red tower with a viewing platform at the top. But one work has been very successful in particular and has become emblematic of a city. The work is called Cloud Gate, and it's in Millennium Park in Chicago. It's become to Chicago, in a way, what the Eiffel Tower is to Paris, in being so associated with the city, and because of the extraordinary reaction of the public. You might say this was part of a series called Mirrorworks, although it is quite an exceptional piece. But what you have with Cloudgate is a work that's become a touchstone, if you like, for people's feelings about the place they live. And it's a remarkable thing. You really see how it allows for the possibility of engagement, both with its environment and with people, the viewers. It has a sort of transformative effect. And in fact, Obama is now giving away models of this piece of work to his visitors at the White House. So, again, I'm going to show you the day that we spent filming there. It also, I think, is quite a good example of the sheer sort of labor and complexity of the logistics that go into making something that appears to be very simple, but is actually phenomenally expensive and extremely time-consuming to produce.
The scale and ambition of Kapoor's work presents great technical challenges.
Just wait here until it comes through, eh, buddy?
Is it possible to... Can you go forward?
People love the bean because they can see themselves in it, they can see the city in it. It has great optical illusions when you're inside. It sort of plays with your mind in all kinds of fun ways.
A bit like a woman. Outside smooth and beautiful, inside complex and perhaps deceiving.
Nice, pleasant, I don't know, gives me a pleasant feeling.
It's smooth, it's mirror-like, it's really round in all kinds of ways. This is a very iconic skyline. To see it in the skin of the bean is, I think, really special.
Outside, smooth, round, organic, oval. Inside, a kind of wormhole.
So you see all these different bits and pieces of color coming together, reflected by all the people around. Kaleidoscopic.
There's a lot of things that you could say about it.
The spirit of Chicago has always been our skyline, our architecture, and the history. The magic beam, yeah, it's beautiful.
We encourage people to touch the beam. In fact, we clean it every day. It's part of the budget to have to clean it. People love to take their picture with their hand on it.
It's hard to conceive that this object could land here in the park, and people just don't understand how it happened and how it could be so perfect. So the idea was to build these 168 individual pieces, and you couldn't even stick a pin between the two adjoining plates. But when you start welding it, this was an exacting science. If there was any imperfection at all, it would be manifested in the surface, and Anish didn't want that.
We had no idea what it would cost. Our first thought was maybe $3 million. The budget was $9 million. It cost $23 million.
I'm glad they took their time. I think anything like that, you take your time, because if you rush it, you don't appreciate it at the end. You're trying to do something that's not natural. You capture the essence of Chicago. That whole skyline represents the whole immigration. People who work with their hands, architects, engineers who built the beautiful skyline. You capture the past, the present, of course, the future.
Sorry about the technical problems that we're having. So I hope you can see that in each clip in this film that I'm showing you, I've tried to, where I've been filming a particular work, I've tried to bring together a number of different ideas and themes and explore them. So here in Cloudgate, again, it's very much about this idea of the surface of an object and its illusory quality and optical effects, the tactile nature of the work, its power to engage people, the public, and clearly transform the image of the city in this case. And it's also about the sheer skill, the technical skill of putting it there, of creating it. It seems to me that one of the other issues that I hadn't really tackled in the film was about scale. And as I said earlier, at a certain point in his career, Anish Kapoor started to make work that was very large. And that changed, it seemed to me that changed the nature of the work completely. So it was exciting territory and something that I wanted to explore, and I wasn't sure how to do that. And I got in touch with a filmmaker in New Zealand who had been following a big project for a number of months, and she had a huge amount of footage, which she sent to me. And I cut this footage down to make a sequence about this work that Anish Kapoor was creating in New Zealand. It was on a small island, a private island, or a private sort of park area owned by someone in New Zealand. And so it's not really open to the public, but even this work that's only accessible to very few people, you can see the amount of work and the amount of attention to detail that goes into it. So I used the footage and put my own interview material that I had from Anish and music. And I think the outcome, in a way, does capture something of the scale and ambition of Kapoor's work. And shows how much attention to detail he will give to something even like this. So you could show the clip that we almost saw just now, but didn't. Thank you.
The scale and ambition of Kapoor's work presents great technical challenges.
Just wait here until it comes through, eh, buddy?
Cross over when you get to the intersection you wanted.
In New Zealand, he's overseeing the installation of a new work that will be built into the landscape.
Somewhere deep in my heart is a Wagnerian will to the grand. I think in the last few years I feel I can handle a bit more of that.
At this point now we can take this chain block off and nothing's going to slip. Rick? 1, 2, 3.
Like much of his work, it's designed with the location in mind. In this case, it must be secure enough to withstand the weather conditions of the New Zealand coast.
We expect 120 mile an hour winds. We'd have the cable wires inside pockets. Really, it's a very careful bit of tailoring. I guess there's a lot of sail makers here, so this is a specialist sail. I mean, what's important to me is the way it's all joined together, the tension, the sense that this thing could almost be made out of steel. That it's a drum extremely taut and pulled to a very particular form. Fundamentally, I think I feel that I make art for myself. If it works for me, I make the assumption that it'll work for somebody else. There is some kind of a moment of recognition between what I know and what I see. And it's the quality and depth of that recognition that I think has something to do with the energy and meaning of a work.
So I've got one more clip to show you from the film. Thank you for listening. Sometimes we ran into problems. I haven't actually shown you much from the Royal Academy exhibition itself, which in a sense is the spine of this film. And many of the things which I filmed were kind of diversions, in a sense, from the central narrative of the film, which is Kapoor preparing for this major exhibition. A very, very significant moment in his career, because it's probably the most prestigious art gallery to show your work in Britain, or one of them. The Royal Academy was founded in the 18th century. It has a very illustrious history. And central to the concept of this film was that we would film not just the creation of the work, but also the installation process. But we found, when we came to do that, that the gallery themselves had a policy of not allowing filming, and had never done so. So that obviously presented quite a lot of problems for us. And it turned out that there was quite a lot of anxiety associated with our attempts to do that. But we did, in fact, in the end, manage to negotiate access to the installation. And it was interesting to me to see how important the installation process is to the creation of the exhibition, how subtle changes can make very big differences to how the works sit together. There was a great deal of jeopardy in the run-up to this exhibition. It was the most extraordinary assault on the building, if you like, that I think it had ever experienced. Kapoor was doing things that had never really been tried or conceived. And so the next clip I'm going to show you is from the installation of his work, Shooting into the Corner, which is also showing here at the Pinchuk Art Gallery. So I thought you might find it interesting to see the installation of this work in London. And as I said earlier, it was a big question in this film about how much we might reveal about Anish himself. And in fact, it took us quite a long time to persuade him to do the main interview in the film, which is actually seems now so important to the film. But it was relatively late in the process of making it that we actually got him to agree to do an interview more about his personal life and his thoughts about, for example, psychoanalysis, and the fact that he'd had a major psychoanalysis in his life. And this, in many ways, become central to his thinking about art, his thinking about life. Not, as I said earlier, that his biography is explicit in his work in any way, but as he says in the film, without it, there's nothing. So the next sequence, I think, shows in some ways this balance between ideas, intuition, and personal history. But it's also a great sequence because you can see his real delight in making work. I think that really comes across in this final clip that I'm going to show you. Thank you.
Because there is this element of, you know, a series of the unconscious operating in a lot of this.
It seems to me that there's no other reason to be an artist. That, you know, if I know what I know and you know what you know and I tell you what I know, who cares? My instinct is that making work is about I'm daring to go to something I don't know and hoping that in going where I don't know, you the viewer, can go where you don't know too. There's a kind of psychodrama going on in a way. Machine that's shooting into the other room. You know, it's blatantly sexual. It's violent. It's aggressive. It seems to be saying that the act of making a mark anywhere, in anything, is an act of violence. And that there's something about that which is poetic.
Wow. I could try one in reverse.
Go, do it. Do it. We're just going to experiment. You know, this is going to take a bit of doing, really. Ooh. What's the door frame made of? I think it's a great work, dare I say. It's a nice way to make a painting. Oh, I don't know. I feel good about it, actually. It takes me back to really early work I made when I was a student. And in fact, at some level, this work goes to the very core of anything I've ever done as an artist.
The anticipation and the relief.
I don't particularly have anything to say as an artist. I don't have some grand message that I want to give you. For me, the work, it's neither abstract nor is it not abstract. It sits between meaning and no meaning. So apparently it's just a form, and then, well, maybe it's not just a form. You know, it looks like, relates to, feels like something I know. The route to meaning may not be direct. You know, that's one route to meaning, and that's the other route to meaning, if you know what I mean.
A block of wax is relentlessly pushed through the archways of the Royal Academy, leaving a trail of debris. It's called Svayam, which means self-generated.
Is it true, I read somewhere that the Konchalovsky film, A Runaway Train, was something which sort of was in your head with this?
Definitely. The violence of it, first of all. This thing going through a snowy landscape. It's like this block of ice moving, collecting stuff, dropping stuff. I'm so there, physically there. That, you know, I would say it really deeply influenced me.
Well, thank you. That's the final clip. That's the end of my talk. And I hope you found it interesting. Please, yeah. I hope you get a chance to see the film. It's on this evening at the PinchukArtCentre. And I'd be very happy to answer any of your questions if you would like to ask a question.
Metью, first of all, thanks for your talk and the film. It was so amazing. And, you know, I couldn't even imagine such a vivid, dynamic and stylish documentary. And I'd like to ask you to talk a bit about the soundtrack, the music, because the music in the film was amazing. And my next question, maybe what influenced you the most as film director? So I'm asking you about your sources of inspiration.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dasha. Yes, obviously music is really important in this film. And I have a friend who's a composer. He's a very successful and interesting composer, and he works across theatre and dance and opera and film music and all sorts of performance music. And I had a lot of discussion with him about what I was doing, and he created some work. He created some music especially for me, but also gave me his back catalogue of music. So I tried to stick with one composer because I felt that it had a sort of integrity to it, and I really like his music. It's very unusual. In terms of sources of inspiration, that's a really difficult question because
some people, maybe artists, people, music, films,
well,
everything.
What I would say is it's a good question. It's a very good question, but it's I think when you're making a film about an artist, you're trying to draw inspiration from them, I suppose. I mean, that sounds a bit like a cop-out, but actually it's true that in a way, the way that Kapoor himself approaches his work did sort of influence us in the way that we did. I looked at quite a number of films about sculpture, and some films that had been made about his work, and I didn't feel that they'd really kind of filmed his work that well, because there always seemed to be it seemed to be less powerful. And he himself actually said he'd always felt that documentaries about him had been a bit disappointing. So I really wanted to try and make sure that he was happy with it. And I think he was. So. Does anyone else have a question? I'd love to answer your questions.
Hello.
Hello.
During the creating this film, did you had an idea that maybe you have had some idea to create some art object like Anish, except of the film? Because looking through these clips, I was trying to create something unusual even, but you had a lot of work with these materials, communicating with this person. Maybe you had some ideas of creating some art objects.
That's a very good question, and yes. So the question is, did I feel inspired myself to actually create artwork? It's interesting when you have this very privileged access to an artist and his studio and his working process and his models and the technicians, and you suddenly actually experience the whole process of being an artist in a different way. It's a kind of role model in a way. And so I did in the process of making the film. I mean, I'd love to try and create works of art, but I mean, what's inspiring for me as a filmmaker is having this access to people, to practitioners and to artists working at the highest level.
And maybe the experience communicating with Anish maybe give you some new ways of thinking like a director, like a film, or not?
Yes, that's also true. I think one of the things which I like about the way Anish works is that he's extremely open-minded, and he explores ideas without judging them too quickly. And I hope that some of that comes across in the film, that he, as he says in that last clip, he dares to go to a place where he doesn't know what is going to happen. And that was actually, for me, the experience of making the film was like that at times, because I would turn up at his studio. I required a certain level of planning to do that, because I needed a crew and I needed equipment, and I needed to organize a schedule. But sometimes I would turn up at the studio and actually nothing was happening, or something completely different was happening from what I had anticipated or what had been planned. And that sort of fluidity and the unexpected, I think, did influence the film, and actually the role of chance, I think, was very important somehow, because it could work against me. I might turn up and Anish would say, look, I can't be filmed today because I've got to go and do something else. Or something completely unexpected would happen that was wonderful. And so, yes, it did influence me a lot.
Thank you for your presentation. It's pretty interesting. I didn't know about this art about Anish Kapoor before. And I have one question. And did you change your opinion before start of this movie and at the end of the movie about this kind of art? Or do you have still the same opinion about art of Anish Kapoor? I mean, at the start of the movie and the end of the movie. Have you changed your mind?
Yes, that's a good, again, as a filmmaker, yes, you do sort of go on a journey yourself. And I think I wasn't that familiar with his work. I knew of his work, obviously, and I was particularly aware of the big pieces. And I was aware of some of the critics as well, the critical views of his work. But I think perhaps I'm biased, because having immersed myself in that world and seen the level of sort of artistic enterprise that goes into it, I became more and more, yes, drawn in. But I think you do have to stand back a bit as well as a filmmaker. You can't just completely embrace somebody's work and just say it's, you know, fantastic. And, you know, it's, to some extent with these programs, it is a film that tries to sort of explore and expand the artwork so that people can have some access to it and understand it and engage with it. It's not a critical view, but at the same time, if you're a filmmaker, you have to have some balance in the way that you approach things. You know, you have to take into account that there's a huge array of opinion about people's work, and you know, you have to be careful about that, I think. But personally, I like the work a lot.
In fact, we've got the question from the internet. So, Metью, how the works of Anish Kapoor and working on film itself influenced your life? Maybe it's changed it somehow?
I'm getting a lot of personal questions here, that's fine. So how did the film change my personal life? Well, it's true that you know, when television is a very involving business, and you know, it does involve a lot of time, a lot of effort, and you know, I was traveling a lot, and I think it's certainly it changed my sensibility towards this work. And gosh, it's a very difficult question, I'm sorry. But I think I can't give you a specific example of how it changed my personal life. But I did very much enjoy the process. And I think Anish is a wonderful person. I mean, not just an artist, a wonderful person to be around, and it was very interesting to see what an extraordinary creative environment his studio is to work in. I hope that answers the question to some extent. Hello.
And I have some questions, and I just realized that really what happened, his works are engaging the viewers. They are pretty simple. Just a mirror in a shape, and a viewer makes his own sense, his own assumptions from what he sees. And this is what you do in your film. You ask people, and they tell about exactly that. That's just a note, and I have a question.
That's an observation that you're making.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. Yeah.
And in some way, maybe you gained this inspiration from his works.
Yes, I mean, it's something that, so what you're saying is essentially that, that he allows, he doesn't give the work too much explicit meaning. So this allows people to bring their own interpretations to the work.
Yes.
And something that he says towards the end of the film is actually he realizes that by creating space for interpretation allows for a huge range, a huge spectrum of engagement with his work that otherwise wouldn't be there if the meaning was too explicit. And so I think that's a very good point.
Yeah, and also I wanted to ask you how you feel about copying art like maybe Anish's. Are you aware of any copies of his art illegal copies, maybe in China? And also, are you aware of any copies of your film, maybe on internet?
I'm not aware of any copies of Anish's work. I mean, obviously, I'm sure that he's very influential on many artists in the world, as many successful artists are. But I'm not aware of anyone reproducing his work, no.
And what about your films?
I don't think this film is on the internet. Some of my films have been. I made a documentary about Ai Weiwei, which is on YouTube. But I think part of the reason that was on YouTube is because it's about a Chinese artist, and people in China would not have access to that film if it wasn't on the internet. So although from the BBC's point of view, it's obviously not good to have your work illegally distributed in that way. In some ways, I'm quite pleased that 200,000 people could see it in China, who otherwise wouldn't have access to it.
Thank you.
Hello,
Hello,
Matthew.
Anna.
My question is, what is your favorite work of Anish Kapoor? I mean, if you would give it a thought, what would you say? What is your favorite?
Good question. But a difficult question. I think the most inspiring experience I had was probably in Chicago. I went for 2 days. I hired a crew and then spent a day filming at Cloudgate, and it's a kind of wonderful experience to be there. It has a very special quality to it. It's slightly too besieged by people to really appreciate it. I arrived at 7:30 in the morning, and I thought that I'd probably have about 2 or 3 hours of time to film the work. But actually I only had 15 minutes, because at 7:45, a huge group of school children arrived to see it. It's just extremely popular, and then it was just packed all day. But I think as a work, it really is, it's very special. Wow. What wouldn't I like to have in my house? Well, I think it'd be quite good to have the train of Siam. Just kind of, it'd be a nice talking point to have that sort of drifting through your living room. But obviously, you know, the mirror pieces are really stunning, and the gun, of course, yes. To have the gun in your entrance to my house would be lovely. Yeah, I mean, I think some pieces are made to have in a sort of domestic setting, I suppose, and some aren't. But the mirror pieces are really beautiful.
Metью, please, українською мовою можна задати питання? Я хочу втрутитися в вашу вишукану інтелектуальну мистецьку бесіду рідною мовою. Я ніколи до цього часу не чув про Капура, але сьогодні довідався. Відвідав центр і бачив інсталяцію, яка мені особливо сподобалась. Окей? Окей? Я сьогодні лише довідався про Капура, великого митця, і відвідав спеціальну інсталяцію PinchukArtCentre. І мені особливо сподобалась робота, яка називається, ви її, напевне, знаєте, «Лайно і скульптура». Колони з бетону різної там конфігурації. Бачили, так? І, здається, вся творчість цього митця, якого ви так натхненно розкручується, вона пронизана якраз оцією головною темою, скатологічною, лайном, розумієте. І якщо у вас отой шматок, брусок воску чи парафіну, який рухається по Лондонському музею, викликає асоціацію поїзда, в мене це викликає асоціацію великого шматка лайна, який рухається, виповзає. Треба бути вам відвертим, ідіть до кінця, адже ви прагнете концептуалізму. Чому б не спорудити велетенську дупу, з якої вилазить великий постмодерністичний кавалок?
I'm not sure if you're asking me a question or whether you're just telling me something. But it's a very good point. And
И дам теперь.
Традиційний підхід до мистецтва передбачає його довершеність, цілісність продуктів цього мистецтва. Завершеність. Коли я споглядаю ці натяки на, я сказав, вжив слово скатологічний, і цей ваш митець Капур, він говорить, що знайомий з творчістю Зігмунда Фройда. Для того вчителя, власне, Капура, тунелі і поїзди – це асоціювалося з статевим актом, наприклад. Тобто йдеться про фізіологію. Фізіологічне, я цілком серйозно говорю, все фізіологічне. Наше травлення, наше відправлення, наша секреція, наша екція – це все наповнено глибинним, мистецьким, перцептивним змістом. І з допомогою парафіну не зобразиш те, що можна зобразити з допомогою справжнього живого лайна.
Again, thank you for that very interesting comment. And you are right. I'm not here as an art expert in a way. I'm a documentarian, I'm a filmmaker. But I agree that a lot of Anish Kapoor's work is very sexual. It is very much about the body, about the interior of the body. It's about shit. It's about, also about perfection. It's about, well, I mean, for me it is about all these things. And I think the fact that you have these interpretations when you see the work for the first time is a great thing. And I think, that's what it's there for. That's the power of art. So, but yes, if you get a chance to see the film, there is a sequence in it about the creating of those concrete works. They have a slightly different name in the exhibition in the Royal Academy. But they're clearly very different from his other types of works. And yes, I think the associations are all there with feces, with shit, with... Or as Homi Bhabha, one of the interviewees in the film, says, for him, they're either magnifications of something very, very small, or they're enlarged, or they're miniaturizations of something very large. Thank you. I don't know how we're doing for time, but is there any more questions?
Можно я задам вам на русском? Вам не приходилось наблюдать за созданием какой-либо его работы от начала, от рисунка, от макета до завершения? Спасибо.
No, I don't think we did do that, because I think the way in which I observed him working was on many, many different things all at the same time. And so I saw him and filmed him at very in the first stage of creativity, literally going into a studio and making a mark on a bit of paper. And I also saw him finishing, works that had taken many months to create, and the whole spectrum in between. But to have followed the process of creation through to the sort of delivery of the idea, if you like, would probably have taken too long. I was with him, it was the film, we made the film over the course of a year. But during that time, he was starting new pieces, and he was finishing pieces, and he was in the middle of pieces. So I've tried to give in the film a sort of sense of these different stages of his working process. You'll see there is a moment in the film where he's alone in a studio, and he's making a mark on the wall. And this is just him, going into the studio and trying something out, or making a model. I'm not sure where those ideas developed, but I think what you also see is that lots of ideas come together, and they're constantly evolving as he makes things. So one of the good examples of this is in the concrete works, where you see that actually they're just being made, and sometimes there are mistakes, and then he likes the mistakes, and sometimes he tries something out and doesn't like it, and so you do get a sense of the different parts of the process. I hope that answers your question. I mean, the question is actually very simple, and my answer is no, but I was trying to sort of explain really how I tried to give the viewer a sense of that process that he may or may not go on.
Hi, Metью. I want to ask, as a creator of a film about Anish Kapoor, I suppose that you know Anish not only as an artist, but as a human. What can you tell about Anish Kapoor as a human? For example, if you never knew that Anish is a great artist.
Sorry, could you say the second part of it?
For example, as you never knew Anish Kapoor as an artist, only as a human, a simply human, what can you say about him?
What can I say about Anish Kapoor as a person as opposed to an artist? I mean, he's a very warm, intelligent, and charismatic individual. He's, as you see sometimes in the film, he has quite a fiery temper at times. He's very my experience of him is that he's actually has a slight contradiction in the way that he is, in that he's very open-minded, but at the same time he knows exactly what he wants. And as one of his workers says in the film, that makes it quite difficult for them to work with him, because they need to kind of get very much into his way of thinking and make sure that he's happy with what they're doing. I found him really a really fascinating man to work with, and not always easy, because it was a very high-pressured situation. There was a lot at stake, there was a lot being made, there was a lot to do, and when you're there as a film crew, you're always getting in the way and interfering and taking up time, and that's precious time. So, although I think quite understandably he prioritized his own work, I found him to be essentially really very generous.
Metью, what you think, how Anish made it, how he made into the artist he is. Is it chance or is it his insistence? What's your opinion on this?
Thank you for the question. So how did Anish become such a successful artist? I don't know, actually. That's I think possibly have to draw the line at that question because I'm not sure I could really articulate that very well. I think fundamentally he's a very brilliant artist and many people in the world agree with that. And so, of course, getting into the art world is difficult. I mean, he came to the attention of people quite early on. He represented Britain at the Venice Biennale. He had some major exhibitions which were extremely successful early on. And I think someone once said to me that it was when Anish began to set up a studio system that he really took off as an artist. I actually don't know whether that's true, but that's what I was told. That actually when he was able to increase the output of his work significantly, it had a huge impact on his ability to make an impact in the world. And I suspect that's probably true because many big successful artists will have their own sort of studio system. And you see this in the film. There's a lot of people working on his work. And it doesn't mean that the hand of the artist is not involved, because you also see that he's absolutely attentive to every single detail of the work. I think it's a complex question I can't really answer, but I suspect it's to do with a lot of things.
I think unless there are any more questions, we better draw a line there, as Matthew's been on the go for quite some time now. Thank you very much, Matthew, for the talk and the illustrations. Absolutely fantastic. And I hope people do get the chance to see the exhibition before it finishes. Have one more go to see it. What you've seen maybe here might change some of the perspectives of things you see in the exhibition itself. I would like to remind you that next Saturday at the same time at 4 o'clock we will have Caroline Douglas, who is the head of the Arts Council of England Art Collection, one of the largest art collections in the UK, who has done curatorial and exhibition work with Anish Kapoor, and she will be giving her perspectives on working with and the work of Anish Kapoor. And once again, many thanks to Matthew for your time and for the presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you.